Welcome to our latest episode of the Lebanese Physicians Podcast, and today we will discuss, is it the end of clinical trial delays and how AI is transforming site selection and feasibility. We know that clinical trials save lives, but of course launching a study often takes months. If all of us have dealt with trials, it takes months. Site feasibility assessments, investigator outreach, operational planning, before the first patient can even be enrolled. What if our AI could compress that timeline from months to days? Our guest today is Dr. Chadi Nabhan, who's currently the Chief Medical Officer of Ryght AI, a physician. He's a physician executive and oncologist, a best-selling author, and we're just discussing the books that you've written.
Oh, yes.
A podcaster and a healthcare innovator. Welcome, Chadi, to the podcast.
I appreciate it, Khalil, and congratulations on your success. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, and congratulations on your podcast to yourself. So you've had a remarkable journey from you were a practicing oncologist, then you did some leadership roles across academia, healthcare organizations, industry, and now AI. What drew you to your current company and what drew you to the mission in clinical trials?
Yeah, throughout the career journey, as long as your steps in your career is hopefully translating into helping patients, families, then it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, whether the provider side being in the clinic or on the industry side or the executive side. My current role is really focused on what can we do to shorten the life cycle of clinical trials. Clinical trials take a long time to be done, to be executed. On average, many trials take about 10 to 12 years, and they're costly, $1 to $3 billion. And probably the best kept secret in clinical trials, Khalil, and I think your viewers and listeners may not know this, 90% of drugs that are going through the clinical development process and phase 1 and phase 2 studies, they actually never make it to the commercial market. They actually fail for a variety of reasons. And like you said in your opening monologue, clinical trials do save lives. So if we're able to cut the time these clinical trials take, then we can rapidly bring these potentially life-saving drugs to the marketplace, and hopefully this helps patients. So Ryght AI is completely focused on shortening the clinical trial life cycle through generative and agentic AI. So what we focus specifically on is site identification, identifying the best suitable sites for any given clinical trial at scale, beyond oncology and globally. And then once we identify these sites, rapidly assessing feasibility and rapidly activating these sites. So we think that this really shortens, hopefully, the clinical trial life cycle. We're obviously downstream after the protocol development. The company or the investigator may take them 2 years to write a protocol. We're not involved there. Once it's done, we can rapidly identify the sites and activate the trial sites as well.
Yeah, because one thing we don't think about, you've spent years involved in clinical trials yourself, and a lot of other people have done that too. But so what are currently the biggest inefficiencies you encountered in trial startup and site selection?
If you think about the way sites are selected for any given protocol, it's not always data-driven, right? It's sometimes based on relationships. You're at the company, you know somebody at that site, so you call them and you open the trial at that site. You assume that the site is going to be successful because somebody told you they have done very well in a previous study. The investigator themselves, they have the illusion that if I open this trial, the patients are going to come in. So there's really this misalignment. So the sites that are being selected for many trials are not selected because of data. It's just because of a variety of other reasons that are not really scientifically based. And with that, when you don't select the right sites, the sites are positioned to fail in terms of enrollment. They still enroll maybe, but not on time, and they lag behind. That's one part. When you think about the site activation, there are a lot of elements in the site activation process that take time and redundant could be automated. Just think of the contract negotiation and the budgeting between sites and organizations. We were at the latest ASCO meeting. I was part of a session that was discussing time to trial activation and contracts and budget negotiation by itself. Could take months the lawyers and the legal and the compliance and all that stuff. And I'll mention a third thing also, sometimes IRB reviews. If the IRB meets every 2 months or every 2 weeks and they only 1 hour, they're not going to have time to really review everything. And many institutions want to have the IRB, the local IRB, review the trial versus central IRB. That's all they do. So there's all of these elements in the process, but I think these three things, the lack of data that is leading to selecting the sites, the budget and the contract negotiations, and the IRB time, these are three big bottlenecks I think we can really improve upon.
Exactly. These are huge bottlenecks that I've dealt with myself too, because also
Yeah,
sometimes you start a study, but then you don't have the adequate staffing to move the
exactly.
study forward afterwards. So we have a lot of listeners who probably are not involved deeply in research operations, but so you said there's somebody who writes a protocol, right? Probably at the pharmaceutical company or in the industry who does that. But what happens between writing a protocol and enrolling the first patient? And how many years does it take between one and the other?
I'll give you an example. I think a lot of times, I think your viewers and listeners will appreciate that. And I wrote that in an upcoming book coming out. So in 2013, I had an idea about a protocol that I wanted to, about a trial. And I was at the University of Chicago at the time. And I remember I met at ASCO 2013 in Chicago with the company I was requesting drug from, and back and forth. Then finally they said, okay, fine, we'll submit a letter of intent and the idea. So I submit that letter and I submit the thing. And then it took a year back and forth until finally they approved it, because then I had to write the protocol and things like that. In 2014, they agreed that they will sponsor the trial. Then now start the negotiation between the company that is sponsoring the study and the institution I was at. And that took another year. And then in 2015, finally, the trial opened in July, and my first patient in was in September 2015. And the trial, of course, lagged behind, and it took about 4 years to enroll, and finally it was completed in 2022. So it takes a long time. What happens between writing the protocol and the first patient in is a variety of steps. You write the protocol, and after that, you go through all of the internal stakeholders at the company. Then you have to contract sometimes with CROs, right? Occasionally, companies decide to do it all on their own. These are usually large pharma that have resources internally. They don't need CROs. Smaller companies, they outsource lots of the processes to CROs. The CROs, let's face it, they're not efficient. They claim they'd like to be efficient, but they have not risen to the expectations, in my opinion. So the CROs, then they have to define the sites, do the feasibility. Then once they decide on the sites, then they actually proceed with contract, negotiation, budget. And so it takes several years until you're able to activate a study because of all of these steps.
Exactly. It's a lot of years. And that's where you don't want to fail, right? If you're going to take you that long, you don't want to fail when you do it. So where do most clinical trials fail before they begin? Is it in
I
site
think,
selection, patient recruitment?
yeah, I think, I don't know if there's one piece that I think all steps are important. Even when you write a protocol, if the protocol is not pragmatic, if it's really going to have very restrictive inclusion exclusion criteria and very challenging to enroll to, you could fail there because you're requesting a very difficult niche patient population. I think site selection, they do fail at it plenty. The statistics, Khalil, don't lie. Here are the statistics. 80% of sites that open a trial, they are running behind schedule. 80%. 50%. 50% of sites, they enroll zero or one patient within 6 months of opening a trial. And one third of trials close completely because of poor enrollment. So you already have the statistics don't lie. Clearly, so that's a big deal. Site selection is a part where they actually fail. After that, I think after the site selection, the time to study activation at each site also is a long time because of the redundant processes and inefficient approach to a lot of these processes. But we actually believe that site selection is one of the biggest bottlenecks because if you open this trial at the sites most likely to succeed for that specific trial, it's going to work for everyone. Everything else falls into place. So we think that this is actually a big deal, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think it's one of the biggest bottlenecks.
No, I agree because site selection means you've already looked at the staffing at that site, the IRB approval process, the budgeting, all the stuff that it takes to get the trial off the ground. So I agree with you 100%. That's an important part. So how much, it's very interesting to me because whenever I get contacted for a clinical trial, like you have a big company, then they get a CRO coming over to do a site visit and all this stuff. How much time and money does the industry like lose annually because of poor site selection decisions?
There are various statistics on that, and there are some reports suggest that every delay could cost a company could be $50,000 a day. That's a lot of money that the company is losing. The other stats that's actually important, if you put yourself in the shoes of the sponsor of the company, and now you open that trial at various sites, and the sites are not enrolling, you are faced with a very tough decision. Are you going to close these sites and say, I'm going to close the trial at these sites, which basically have now sunk cost, you've lost all of the money that you already put into these sites, or do you still try to continue? And remember, if you close these sites, you have to open other sites. So now you have to endure additional cost of opening new sites and so on. So that's why that piece is so important. And actually, sponsors get that. When you talk to sponsors, I spend a lot of time talking to sponsors. They understand it. They realize how challenging this is. They're not happy with the current solution. So they're very open to new ideas and new innovations. But that's a lot of money if you think about $50,000 a day for some trials, especially rare studies and so on. But there are stats it's estimated in millions for every single year that you are really running behind schedule.
Like you mentioned, because that's ideal also the alpha 1 antitrypsin deficiency, which is a rare disease. Some of these rare disease trials, we have to open up a huge number of sites to be able to recruit enough patients. So if you fail in 50% of these sites, that's a big deal, I think.
It is a big deal.
Yeah,
It is a big
yeah,
deal. And hopefully we're able to help them with that.
exactly. And now that's where we get to so you talk about when I talked to you before and looked at your website, you talk about AI site twins, right? What exactly is a site twin and how does it differ from a traditional feasibility assessment?
A digital twin is really a digital replica for a physical structure, right? So basically, a site digital twin is a digitized replica of a site that is executing and involved in clinical trials. Any site digital twin that we have includes the qualitative and quantitative capabilities of that site in any type of clinical trial. And the way we do that is by getting all of the publicly available information on these sites. If you are a site that have been involved in a clinical trial, then there's a lot of public information about you on trials.gov and other registries. There are other European registries and so on. If you have investigators at that site, obviously, that have been involved in publishing data on particular studies, this will be available on PubMed. If you are audited by the FDA, this is available on the FDA website. So what we actually have is we have AI agents that are bringing data into each digitized site twin. And that's actually helpful because what we do then after that is our AI will read any clinical trial because you can upload a clinical trial on our platform where the AI reads the trial. In other words, it understands what the trial is about, what's the indication, what is the biomarker needed, what are the inclusion exclusion criteria, what is the schedule of events, so what do you need to actually do to exit on the study, and then it matches these requirements against 60, 70,000 digital twins that we have on our platform. So it tells you these are the best 1,000 sites around the globe for this specific study. And then we tier it. We do tier one, tier two, tier three based on, because not all sites are created equal. So there are like the top tier are the most successful, then tier two, and then tier three. The digital twin, in summary, includes so much information about each site, plus inferred information. So if you're at your site, you've conducted a phase one trial, then we would know the capabilities you have because you wouldn't be able to open a phase one trial unless you had X, Y, and Z in your site. So all of this information, the available and the inferred, are present. It gets matched against any type of a clinical trial in any therapeutic area. And then it tells you these are the best sites. And the sponsor can say, I want sites only in Europe. I want sites only in LATAM. I want only sites in Asia, and we're able to configure the platform to select sites in the regional area that the sponsor wants.
Basically, the data, what data points are you collecting? So you're collecting investigators, right? What they've done before, previous success, what kind of
Absolutely.
clinical trials have been run at that site. And what about the disease process? Like how many patients with this disease are at this site, for example?
You can. That's a very important question. We have some APIs through for the US Census, for example. So you're able to tell in certain geographic area the prevalence of a particular disease. So that will be important. That may not be available globally. I may not know the prevalence in India or China or Japan, but I may. So we literally, our AI and data scientists, that's really all what they do is bring all of this data, including what you just mentioned. But sometimes it's not always available for every single site, but we're getting there. In addition to that, I think prescribing habits is important. So we were working with a sponsor recently, and one of the most important thing to them, according to their own analytics, that the physicians who prescribed a particular class of agents are the most likely, the sites that prescribe the most of this class of agents are the ones that are most positioned to succeed. So that's obviously we're able to get that through the claims database. You're able to actually tell who prescribed what. But it's fascinating. Before generative AI, you couldn't really make sense of all of this. Now you could put all of this together and it really makes sense. You're able to actually have structured information at each site, tells you what the site could do and cannot do. There's no way you could do that before ChatGPT.
Yeah, and I feel that this information is fluid. You can probably build on it over time and make it more accurate
Ab-
as you go. Uh,
Absolutely. That's the key.
so can you give us an example, like AI might
Yeah.
select a site that's ideal when traditional methods maybe would have overlooked the site, or let's say traditional methods said this is a great site, but
Yeah.
turned out it's not. Like, how do you give us an example of that?
So recently we issued a press release that we are working with the American Society of Clinical Oncology, ASCO. Again, ASCO, for those who probably don't know, is the largest oncology society in the world. ASCO has a trial in metastatic breast cancer looking at a particular class of drugs, CDK4/6 inhibitors. And the trial is already open in 13 sites that they opened it through the traditional methods. And these sites are not enrolling up to the satisfaction of ASCO, which is the sponsor of the trial. So we worked with them because we said, well, let's leverage Ryght AI to actually help you identify additional sites that are going to position you for success. So we met with them and we understood what mattered to them. And what mattered to them, for example, is they prefer sites with very few competing trials against the trial that they have. And the AI can easily parse this out because you already have your study, you know the trials open at these sites, and you literally give more weight, negative weight, to sites that have competing trials. So they go down in the list of sites you recommend. So that's what we did, and we recommended close to 30 sites to ASCO, and several of them now in the process of activation. And this is really the process by which now you're really not using the relationships, you're using data-driven approach to open sites. This is an example that we are in the process of hopefully publishing this very soon, but this is a very latest example that we shared with the world as we issued the press release last on the 28th of May.
Okay, great. Yeah, because basically you're relying more on data, objective measures, not just like subjectively knowing somebody
Exactly.
and getting the site opened at that place. So your company states that qualified site lists can be generated in days rather than months. What's happening behind the scenes that enables such a dramatic acceleration?
That's the nice thing about the automation, right? What's happening is you already have all of the information that you want on these sites. And what you alluded to earlier is very key. The information are dynamic. They continue to be updated because the AI keeps updating the information in these twins. Really, what's happening is you uploading the protocol of any therapeutic area on a secure SOC 2 certified platform. And the AI just read the entire protocol from A to Z in a matter of seconds, by the way, and then literally matches that protocol against these sites. You decide what you care about, whether it is the geography, competing trials, you program, you kind of wait and say, these are what matters, and so on. But after that, what we have a process by which we generate what we call pre-feasibility questionnaire. Now that we identified these sites, we start reaching out in a very short survey to these sites. And that's key. There's an art to this and there's a methodology to it because we actually think shorter pre-feasibility surveys are much better than the long 20-page ones that nobody wants to answer. But these short 5 questions allows us to know which of these sites we need to send them the longer version with the CDA and so on. So this entire process takes just a couple of days, and it's very fast because you're automating the selection of the sites. That's the unlock. The unlock is I am really automating the selection of the sites, and then we have a contact agent, AI agent, that identifies the best contact person at a particular site for this study. Think about it. If you're getting an email from somebody that about something that is you're completely the wrong person for, you're probably going to think it's a spam or you're going to delete, you're never going to answer. But if you are getting an email about a study and you're really the right person for this particular study, and this is a legit email, you're likely going to answer. Right now, our engagement, which means that whatever we send for emails, we get a response, could be no, could be yes, is 80%. So 80% engagement, this is unprecedented. And we only have a bounce rate of 2 to 3%. So the emails that we actually send, they're accurate in 97 to 98% of the time because the AI agent is scouring the web and getting the right contact information for this study at this site. And then we get engagement of 80% and we get yes in about 56%.
Nice. That's a big number
No,
actually. Because as you said, sometimes you email the site, but you might be emailing the wrong people. So basically AI is telling
AI
you
agent is key. The AI agent is key.
helping with that. So do you think that site selection will be completely automated in the future, or do you think there's still some human component to it?
The human component is going to be pre-site selection, I think. If you're the sponsor, I want to talk to you. What matters to you the most? Because you may have a specific strategy that will actually tell you, I want to open this trial in France because like we're working with a sponsor now, they want France, Italy, Germany, and Finland, I believe, like 5 European countries. I don't know why, but I think in the future, I imagine 5 years from now, we could actually meet before, understand why they want to open in Europe, for example, and say, based on your strategic needs, these are the best countries to open at. Let's say you want an EMA approval. So I imagine it's almost a country twin that just tells you this is the best country for this particular study. I really believe it's going to be automated. I just don't see the human element here is going to be afterwards and before. The actual site selection should not be mundane. Before, it means you decide where you want to open it. I think that's key. And then afterwards, many of the sites you reach out to, they sometimes want to talk to somebody, right? And they say, well, I'd like to have a conversation with the medical person to discuss a couple of things. So there's always a human element in this, but it will make it more efficient for the humans involved in the process of site selection.
Because then you can have contact with humans, but you have a higher probability that this is the right site that you're talking to,
Exactly.
rather than wasting your time with a site that's not going to work out in the future. So now you selected the site. Can you predict enrollment performance before the trial even launches at the site?
That's the holy grail, right? That's the holy grail is can you actually project with a high degree of certainty the number of patients that will be enrolled? I think that's an evolving process. I think what we can do today is we can know which one, when we tier these sites, we can tell which sites are more likely to succeed versus less likely to succeed. The exact number of patients require access to historical data and what they have actually been able to enroll in the past. And that is in our future version. We just launched a site called ryghtsites.com. And in that process, in the next couple of months, sites could go into the system and update their own profile. As part of the update, they will list, for example, the number of patients they have enrolled on prior protocols that they have, which our AI will actually capture. And then based on the numbers that were submitted, we'll be able to project and provide analytics into what we project the number of patients they can enroll. Think of it as you have a lot of public information on Khalil Diab, and I built a profile for you. I went in and I looked at all of the information you happen to have publicly on LinkedIn, on Twitter, wherever it is, and I built a profile to you. And then I send you an email and say, hey, look, this profile is available for you. You may as well just go and update it with additional accurate information because that's going to help X, Y, and Z. And that's what's going to happen. We are already building these profiles, and we're going to reach out to the sites and say, the site twin is available for you. If you go in and update it with additional accurate information, you are going to be more discoverable by sponsors for a given study. This will give you more options for your patients, and this will also bring you more revenue because these companies are going to pay to enroll in your site. So then you can go in and update your digital twin. Part of the update, you put in the number of patients you enrolled in historical trials, and then our AI will analyze your capabilities of the number of patients to do. So that is coming up. It's not a capability that is available today as we speak, but I would say in less than 6 months, this will be available.
That's a work in progress as more data points are collected. How much reduction in start timelines are sponsors realistically seeing today if they use you, let's say? I don't know if you have enough data on that yet.
We're still a bit too early to give you accurate information. I don't think our hope is that will be a substantial reduction, honestly, by 80%. There are certain elements that we're not involved in. We would like to automate, like budget and contract negotiation and so on. You can automate that, but even after you automate this, there are certain sites that their legal and compliance department just take 2 months to even review whatever you already automated. I do think our hope is that we cut everything between 50 to 80% in terms of study start time. And we genuinely all believe that this will save lives.
Exactly. That's a big cut actually in terms of start times.
That's our hope. That's our hope.
Yeah. And so a couple of small questions. So one of them is, I'm seeing a lot of community practices now, especially the bigger ones having a lot of clinical trials, right? Do you think with AI we'll have smaller community practices competing with, let's say, big academic centers?
Most patients are seen in the community, right? Most patients are seen in the community as opposed to academic centers. So it makes a lot of sense to find ways to bring these trials to the community where the majority of patients are seen. And I think that AI will allow them to hopefully be more efficient, not requiring so much of the human resources, because that's really the most expensive. Human resources are the most expensive, and a lot of community sites, they just don't have the capital to invest into that. But if you bring automation and innovative approaches to community sites where patients are seen, I suspect that they'll be able to be more open to having these trials there. I hope that the smaller sites will be able to access these trials. You're right. Right now, you see it in community, mainly larger community sites who have a lot of resources. But my dream is to see that everywhere because that's where patients are,
Yeah, because when you automate it, you may not have to have the
the human
staff that you
resources.
need. It might be less resources that you need in that case. Do you think AI could democratize research if you want to identify high-performing centers in underserved areas? Because a lot of the companies are looking actually for potentially patients in underserved communities to make their trials more representative of the whole community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, the answer is yes. Right now, for example, literally by having access to US Census report, you know the demographics of that are being served at each particular site. So if you have a trial and in the trial you want 30% underrepresented minorities, it makes sense that you select the sites that are really serving these patient populations. The answer is a resounding yes, that AI is going to lead to this. The main issue, depending what you're using AI for, I'm talking here about automation and selection and so on. I think that's really important because if you don't do that, the clinical trials will continue to include the usual Caucasian patients who are from good socioeconomic status and so on. And that doesn't represent the demographics that we serve. So if you have data from clinical trials on patients that don't represent the broader US population, that it's very difficult to even train models on that data to figure out to do analytics because they just don't represent the demographics that you actually see. If you create a predictive or a prognostic model on data from a clinical trial that has 99% white patients, how does this apply to an older Black patient that the model doesn't really, it's not going to be accurate. So there's lots to unpack there.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to ask you, are you worried about bias? Like, what if
Of course,
I start
absolutely.
selecting only the sites that are not in underserved communities?
Yes, I think, and that's we talk about garbage in, garbage out. I always say my hope is that with AI, we'll migrate into quality in, quality out. Bias is a bias, hallucination, all of these things with AI. But bias is a big deal because you have models. That's right, we don't train models. That's not our model. That's not what
Right.
we do, obviously. But broadly in AI, you're really trying to train the machine on set of data. And if that set of data is biased, then your model is going to be biased. I don't know the solution to that, actually. I have an entire chapter in my upcoming book on pitfalls of AI, and bias is a big one of them. And I researched this, and it's really not easy a problem to solve unless you have to really be very diligent in training your AI and your models on data that is properly representative of the broader US community.
Population. Patients, if you're a patient, let's say today, and you're like waiting on, let's say the new pancreatic cancer drug, you're like, I'm gonna pass away, and there's a drug that's in clinical trials, whatever. Do you think Ryght will be able to impact the time from starting the trial to the patients being able to? Because I know it's site selection,
Our
but it's
hope,
hard sometimes.
our hope is that if there is a clinical trial and we're able to cut that literally instead of 8 to 10 years, it becomes 6 years, that hopefully can lead to the drug being available faster to people. That's really the holy grail. That's really what we would like to see. Every time I celebrate the success of a drug approved, I think of people I have lost along the way that could have really benefited from this drug had the drug been available when they were around. This is really always a sobering moment, but I think that that's really our hope.
What's the biggest misconception people have about AI in clinical research?
I don't think people understand AI very well. I don't think I understood it very well several years back. I think a lot of people, when you don't understand the concept, you are scared of it and you are hesitant. The more knowledge and the more you become well versed in AI, then your fear eases. I think that a lot of times we're thinking AI is just robots taking over. And maybe that's true. It's possible. But I think that the biggest misconception, if I may say, because there was also a chapter I wrote on this. I want to talk to regular people about AI, and I did. I went on the road and I talked to people. There are two big things you notice when you talk to random people, by the way. One, people are scared of the loss of the human connection. It's a big fear, and I didn't really appreciate that. You talk to random people in the bookstore, at Starbucks, at wherever it is, and people say, man, AI is going to take over. I already hate when I call an airline and I need to keep pressing zero because I don't want to talk to a chatbot. They hate it. I don't, so they're thinking, which is true, we all hate it. Sometimes you just want to talk to somebody and nobody will talk to you. So that loss of the human connection is a big deal. The second thing that people are afraid of is regulation. So it's not really clear who's regulating this. Is it the government, private sector, a combination of both? So whenever you have a new technology that's not regulated a little bit, it could be used all over the place. So these are the two things I noticed in talking to people that they are worried about.
Exactly. And 5 years from now, what headline would you love to read about the impact of AI on clinical research?
I would like to say that I would love to hear that AI has reduced clinical trial times, time to activation by half. I will be very happy. And has this translated to many patient lives saved?
If you had to choose between a brilliant AI system and a brilliant clinical investigator, which is more important for the success of a clinical trial?
Can I have both? I still think the bright clinical investigator will win my day for me because I just think you have to think of what is the trial that is going to be important for the patients, and then you take the AI and make it help you execute. I still think it starts with the human. Maybe I'm trying to defend my existence.
Thank you, Shadi, for being on the podcast and for letting us know about Ryght AI and the future of AI and clinical research. And for people to know, you have a podcast called Healthcare Unfiltered, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's on YouTube and all podcast apps. And then you've written, as you were mentioned, alluded to, I think you've written already 2 books, and you're in the process of writing your third book at this point.
Yeah, the third one is already done. It's coming out December 1st. It's on AI and cancer care. And I just basically, it's not a tech book, it's not a medical book. It's just explaining things as how AI fits in cancer care and the cancer journey. And so anybody it's written for everybody.
And where can people find your books?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, my publisher, which is Johns Hopkins University Press, on their website as well, and my own website, chadinabhan.com.
Nice. All right. Thank you, Shadi, for being on the podcast.
I really appreciate you inviting me. Thank you, Khalil.